Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Legion Alpha Fury Warrior, the spec I have been gushing about over Twitter and showing it off, and we did a full Stormheim playthrough with it on Twitch. My god, this thing is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun for some people. The direction is very thematic. In fact, I've realized I have been approaching the quick looks in the wrong way, and it's a trap that many of us have fallen into. In fact, we have had access to Legion way earlier than we usually get, in my feeling anyway, before the actual release. We're in a very, very early stage of development with 6 months away from actually seeing the game become live, and many of us like to get a feel for how this spec is going to be like endgame, and how it plays out, and min-max and all that kind of stuff, which is a huge waste of time. I should have learned from myself. You might remember if you were here during the WOD Alpha, is how absurd it is to be doing like mathematics and trying to figure out the exact priorities and rotations and all that kind of stuff at this stage of the game. Absolutely ludicrous play, and I was guilty of that as well. What we're actually looking at is that Legion is the thematic class fantasy expansion, right? They're rejigging everything to fit the class fantasy and bring it back to its roots. That's what they're trying to do, because what's happened, of course, is the evolution of specs has changed so dramatically since their first inception that in a lot of cases they've actually drifted very far away from what they're intended to do. So now they're bringing it back, which is causing some concern, as obviously many players they really like what they became, right? They didn't like how it started out, but they like where it is now, and now we're going back on that again, trying to tone it back a little bit, and so we're like, oh, that fucking sucks. And the Fury Warrior is no exception. What is the theme and the fantasy then? That's what we're going to be looking at, rather than like, oh, this, you know, little intricacies that in iterations is just a waste of time. Let me give you an example. Doing like very iterative rotations of priorities is a fucking nightmare and an absolute waste of cerebral power when the talent trees are clearly a fucking mess, right? And in the Warriors case, and the Shadow Priest case, and Rhett's case, and all that kind of stuff, they clearly are. Numbers are so way off that people are making specs that literally work. They currently work where other specs don't, yet we're still trying to fit this into some sort of mold where we can simcraft it and stuff. Ah, lunacy, and why I fell into that trap, I can only apologize. You expect better from me, and I'll deliver better now. So what is the theme? They're going for the enraged, furious berserker, but they're kind of moving away from the enraged idea. What happened with Furious, it turned to, roundabout Cataclysm, it fell into the idea of being inside of windows, the Colossus Smash window, enrage windows, all this kind of stuff. Now, what they've decided to do, if you remember your class previews, is that arms will be the slower, more methodical, more meticulously planned out, aiming for these Colossus Smash windows where you'll be building up, strategizing for these burst opportunities where you'll take full advantage. Fury is nothing like that. That's not what they want from Fury, and the iterations we've seen so far in Alpha certainly indicate that they do not want it to be that way. What they want it to be is extremely fast, extremely brutal, consistent, sustained, and just going to achieve that in a number of ways. They're going to achieve that one with the new animations, which are extremely fast and extremely brutal. They're bone-crunchingly good. Absolutely astonishingly good. And the sound effects match them perfectly. Absolutely perfectly. So they're going to achieve it in that manner. And the other way they're going to do that is by giving you an absolute boatload of rage in order to continuously cast these spells that have these wonderful, fast, meaty animations. And then you're going to get that sense of pace, that sense of urgency that they want to achieve with Fury. That does mean, however, that in my prediction, if you really enjoyed the idea of having these sort of burst windows and setting up for them, the likelihood is that's not going to exist by the time Legion comes out. Unless there's a huge outcry, of which there is some outcry right now, that is probably not going to happen. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some of these new animations. If you watched my Stormheim stream, you've seen them aplenty. So here's the new charge, an actual shoulder block, and it shares that with Pummel as well. You see the shoulder block? It's so cool. Okay, Rampage. The entire Fury fantasy is going to be built in Legion around Rampage. They love Rampage. They're really happy with it. And this is what it looks like, and this is what it sounds like. If the game didn't crash. There we go. Oh! Be still, my balls! Be still, my hairy nuts. Good God, it's good. And here's the new Whirlwind. Oh, so good. And a spell Odin's Fury, which you'll learn about shortly. Yes, this is how they're going to achieve it. What they want you to do is a lot of this. A lot of Rampage where your character is being fast, furious. You can see the trails left behind as you do it. Lovely Bloodthirst uppercut animation. Some of the animations don't make sense yet, but we're in early alpha, so don't worry too much about animations not making sense. It doesn't bother me if you play, especially zoomed out, as you guys know I tend to do. So, how does this work? What is Rampage, first of all? Rampage, let me spec out of this so you get a real feel for it. Rampage costs 90 rage. It is your primary rage spender. Pretty much everything else besides Execute and Whirlwind generates rage, except for Odin's Fury, which doesn't cost anything and doesn't generate anything, okay? So Bloodthirst generates rage. Raging Blow generates rage, and our new spell, Furious Slash, I say new, it was brought in yesterday. Furious Slash generates rage, okay? What doesn't generate rage? Berserker Rage doesn't generate rage. It doesn't even enrage you now. They took that out in the recent batch. Prepare your rage, don't. It's again, this is a means to an end. We're looking at iterations here. Don't lose your mind just yet. We've lost things like Hamstring, Die by the Sword, all this stuff. Our defensives have been very much weakened, but that's actually, well, I say weakened, not really. Enraged Regen no longer heals you, but it's a 30% damage reduction. I prefer that. Absolutely prefer that. Took a little while to get used to that I was using it earlier in a fight rather than waiting until I lost health to actually take advantage of it. But once you get used to it, it's no big deal. And a 30% damage reduction, I'm fine with that. That's pretty cool. We still have Heroic Leap. Commanding Shout is basically Rallying Cry. Okay? This is not Battle Shout. This is Recklessness. Why it has this graphic, I don't know. I would much prefer the skulls. But Recklessness is now a 30-second cooldown. In fact, I've buggered that again. It's a 1-minute cooldown. Let me spec again. It's a 1-minute cooldown that grants an additional 100% crit. So it doubles your crit chance for just 5 seconds, right? So something to bear in mind there. It's just for 5 seconds, essentially allowing you to fit in just a couple of spells with this bonus critical strike. So it'd be something like a Bloodthirst to get Enrage up, an Odin's Fury, and probably a Rampage. Yeah, something along those lines. Or some Executes, obviously, as you guys know. Heroic Throw still remains, Pummel still remains. Everything else is pretty creamy. And we get Piercing Howl as well, which is all good. I'm happy with that. This has been my absolute favourite spec to play in Legion so far. Absolutely. This really appeals to anybody who wanted or played a Fury Warrior up until Kata, which is when it started to change towards the sort of burst window. If you played it up till then, where it was really fast, really furious, so you played it through Wrath of the Lich King, where you would just spam, 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 constant churning out of damage, and really sort of... Excuse me, I still have the flu. Constantly churning out damage, and rage bars were just filling up constantly. This really appeals to me, who was enjoying that period of time, and didn't enjoy it when it changed to a more meticulous style of play. So let's talk about how it does play and what the theme is going to be. And then we'll talk about the issues that have raised so far and why you might be put off by this spec, especially if you're a fan of the sort of Kata, Mist of Pandaria, and even Warlords of Draenor versions of Fury, because they have changed. So I said earlier that the talent trees are a bit of a mess. Yeah, little bit. Why? Well, we have things like Shockwave, and I want you to bear in mind as we discuss this, we're always taking into account Rampage. Like it or not, all the signs, all the flags indicate that Blizzard really wants you to give a fuck about Rampage. Right? Also note that Rampage doesn't care if you are enraged. It does the same damage. Doesn't matter, right? Rampage will always deal damage as if you were enraged. Takes full advantage of your mastery. Very good. So we have Shockwave, the 40-second cooldown and a stun, right? The AoE stun, you know what Shockwave is, right? But then Meat Grinder, where your Rampage hits 4 additional targets. There's no comparison here. This is like for 5-mans, I think. They're trying to really balance the trees to include the challenge mode thing. And that's messing things up, because you put these side by side from a raid perspective, which is what I always look at any talent tree from a raid perspective. They make no sense. And for single target, Stormbolt. Not surprising that we didn't get some other extra ability for single target. I would rather them have, like... We had the stunning Shockwave. There's only a 10-second difference there. I would really have rather them merge sort of Stormbolt and Dragon Roar into some sort of single target, or it spreads the damage or something like that. That would have been nicer. But Stormbolt is like the single target version. If you want to AoE, it's going to be Meat Grinder, which is just amazing. Absolutely amazing. Really, check, if you don't mind spoilers, check the VOD of Stormheim, where I was doing some big, like, recklessness Rampage Meat Grinders on mobs. It was creamy. The level 30 ones, again, they all seem very confused. So we have Outbursts. What they did was take Rage out of Berserker Rage and reintroduce it as a talent called Outburst. So Berserker Rage now enrages you, and its cooldown is reduced by 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds, you have the ability to enrage yourself for just 5 seconds. Please bear in mind, more advanced Fury Warriors who are aware of this stuff, that the enrage window is now only 5 seconds. Yeah? Basically, what I'm saying to you is, they really don't seem to want you to care about Enrage as a thing. That's going to be an arms thing based on Colossus Smash, right? They don't want you to be thinking with that mindset, in my opinion, in Legion. They don't want you to be like, is my Enrage up or down? And they've done talents and abilities like Rampage, which doesn't care if you're enraged. It'll still work just fine. And also another talent we're going to talk about later that ignore Enrage entirely. So something to bear in mind there. But this is like, so you would say this is a DPS increase, right? Because you get to choose to enrage yourself. But it's mixed next to mobility in terms of heroic leap. And it's also mixed next to a defensive, which is charge taking 20% less damage, which I really like on a fight that's really heavy hitting and big, you know, big dangerous things going on. I'm sure there are many warriors who would have loved to have had this on Blackhand, for example. That would have been really, really nice, but there you go. Level 45. So bear in mind that Rampage is very expensive. We want to be using it. It's like 90 Rage untalented, which we'll get to soon. Or you'd want to be using it above 90 Rage anyway. So there are lots and lots of ways in order to increase your rage. So Endless Rage exists. Generate 50% additional rage. Overpower. This is kind of like nostalgic thrown in. I'm not convinced by this at all. I've tried it like multiple times. This is my 4th Fury Warrior. I'm not even joking. I've had them get stuck. I've had to re-roll them because I had to do a Prot Warrior video and then re-rolled again. And then leveled this one back up again. I've played a lot with Overpower. It just doesn't click. It doesn't have enough interaction with the class. It would be more interesting if Overpower did proc Enrage. It has the bonus of critical strike, yeah? Overpower is a 60% increased chance to be a critical strike. That would be kind of interesting if it worked with Enrage, if Enrage was supposed to be important. I could see this probably disappearing at some point and being a little bit of a filler for now, because right now it just lights up. It's not the end of the world, but it costs 10 rage, which is, you know, it procs regularly. It'll generally have to work out if it's going to play off against Rampage, which it probably isn't, because everything we have in the talents buffs Rampage, as does our artifact weapons. So that's something to bear in mind. Overpower just sits there like a... it feels pointless right now. Avatar still exists. It's kind of mediocre now. It's just a 20% damage increase. It still looks cool, but it could be... what I would like to suggest for this, and it'll make more sense as we go on, is this was moved down to here, replaced Reckless Abandon or Dragon Roar, and was changed to Death Wish. And in fact, it gave you 20 seconds of Enrage. That would be far more interesting for me if it worked that way. So we had the old Death Wish come back for Fury, and Avatar went over to Arms. I'd be more than fine with that. I think that might be better than just a 20% damage increase. Nothing wrong with that, especially for our burst phases. But Fury can work a little differently, in my opinion. It can have a little bit of extra flavor thrown in if it was Death Wish. It could be the same graphic as Avatar, but maybe red. That would be cool with me. Level 60. Second wind, very, very useful for leveling this. I gave this like a pass at first because I thought, not really useful in raiding, but for leveling, my god, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. If you don't take this, you are going to be eating. I'm not going to lie to you guys. You are going to be eating regularly because Victory Rush doesn't exist anymore either. So Second Wind exists, which as soon as you're like out of combat for 5 seconds, you start healing up 6% of your health. You just get topped off all the time. It's really wonderful. But it's in the same tree again as mobility with double time with extra charges. And it's also in the same as what is likely to be the mandatory raid talent. I believe so. It says it also increases leech by 20%. That doesn't say just for you. I haven't been able to test it, unfortunately. I've done a couple of dungeons as Fury, but I just forgot to take it, if I'm being totally honest with you guys. And you guys know I don't check outside sources before making these videos. I find it more fun that way. So, yeah, Commanding Shout is just Rallying Cry, and then it gives it 20% leech. So I believe that affects the whole raid. I would think so. It's probably mandatory in raids. I'm not sure how you guys feel about that. Level 75, Unquenchable Thirst. Bloodthirst generates an additional 10 rage, more rampages. Blade Storm still thrown in there. Feels kind of lackluster now in the face of Meat Grinder. And again, maybe a placeholder that could shift over to arms. And Blade Storm could be an arms ability. Wouldn't mind that. Wouldn't mind that. It's going to be very, very niche in the face of Meat Grinder and the amount of rampages we're going to be doing. Unless you have lots and lots of mobs regularly and you're just taking it for fun, it's unlikely to be something worthwhile for Fury. At the moment, and again, this is early alpha, we're months away from release. There's no reason to say Meat Grinder will exist next week, right? So bear that in mind. Frenzy. Frenzy was really interesting. Now, I am going to talk about some stuff that existed in the previous iteration of Fury. It was changed just yesterday. And the reason I'm going to do that is because the old version was better. And you might say, well, Preacher, why are you talking about things that don't actually even exist anymore in an alpha? It's just because the old system, I think, was better. So, Frenzy, before yesterday's patch, Furious Slash, this ability here, which generates 5 rage and has a 4.5 second recharge, didn't exist, right? This is what your bars looked like. If you spec'd into Frenzy, you gained a new spell, which was Frenzious Strike or Going Mad or whatever. Doesn't fucking matter. We'll call it Furious Slash for now. You can actually see this in play in my Artifact video, by the way, so you can reference it there if you're prepared for spoilers. So what they decided to do was, what that spell did, the original version, is that it had no cooldown, and it just gave you the Frenzy stack. So what does Frenzy do? It's a Furious Slash that increases your haste by 5% for 10 seconds, and it stacks up to 5 times, right? So 25% haste. And the idea was you had to attack 5 times with this spell. You had to press this button, so you wouldn't be pressing... You would either try to weave it into your other spells, or trying to stack it up very, very quickly and then maintain the buff, right? You guys understand that? And that was it. And if you let it fall off, the punishment, of course, is that you had to attack 5 times with this spell to get it back on. So you had a huge incentive to keep this buff on, obviously, rather than having to do those 5 attacks. They changed it with the recent patch to tie it to Furious Slash, which is something you get regardless of whether you spec this or not. You can see if I spec out of it, I still have Furious Slash. So now Furious Slash gives you the stacks. Here's my problem with this. One, it takes over 20 seconds now to actually stack Frenzy. That's a really long time, especially in the PvE raid world. Oh my god. My god, it won't be long before we start seeing, certainly dungeon bosses, maybe even in challenge modes, we'll start seeing them die within 20 seconds, and you can't even get this buff on, trying your absolute hardest. So I'll just show you now. 1, 2. You see I have the 2 stacks. Now I have to wait 4.5 seconds before I can do the next one. Now I wait and wait. I'm not worried about rage here, I'm just showing you this. 4th, and I'm still waiting. 5. There we go. Now I've got my 5 stacks. Now, I was talking about punishment earlier, and there's a good reason for that. With the previous incarnation, you could let this drop and you could get it back up within 5 attacks, right? Straight back to back, 5 attacks. Now, because of this 4.5 second recharge, you actually have a 5.5 second window to refresh it. You can't refresh it early. You have to wait for this 5.5 seconds, which is when Furious Slash comes off cooldown, to actually refresh it. Now, that's not a big deal, but you include any form of movement, a phase transition, or the fact that you might be doing anything else, essentially, within 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, right? You have to understand that this is 5 seconds every 10 seconds of a fight that this falls off, and it takes all that time. You only get 2 back-to-back at the beginning of a fight. You have all that time to have to restack it up again. This is very clunky, and I expect it to change because it's just so punishing to let this fall off. And given its 25% haste and the extra rage that generates, the likelihood is this is going to be the go-to for single target raiding. And yeah, it's a little bit right now a bit clunky. This spell could just do being removed. If you didn't hear it, of course, it has the Wild Strike sound effect. Go and fucking kill yourself, whoever came up with that sound and tried to put it back into my Legion. Go away and die. This could just be... I would love this just to go back to the old system. 5 attacks is more than enough punishment for letting this thing fall off. Enough said. Anyway, 11.19, we brought in Massacre yesterday, which is cool as well. If you're going to base your spec around Rampage, which is likely the way this class is going right now, okay, like it or not, that's probably the way it's going. It means that when you get to the execute phase, you're not likely to be doing Rampages. And the reason is, of course, we are the kings of execute. Execute hits really hard, and they also don't want to be in a scenario where you can boost your Rampage so much that it does more damage than execute. Entirely possible when we look at the artifacts as well. So what they did was bring in Massacre so you can start doing executes. If you crit with execute, your Rampage is free. This means we are really, really the kings of execute. Yeah? Because now we'll be doing our big Rampages, which is what we're going to be doing, and we'll be doing big executes as well. Really appreciate this talent, especially for extended execute phases. Into the fray, though. Great fray away. 5% haste for every enemy near you, up to 5 enemies. So another 25% haste. This could get really out of hand if you could do it correctly. We'll see, we'll see. Although it is sad to see 2 talents that do essentially the same thing. They are basically like a single target version and an AoE version, so we'll have to wait and see what plays off here. Again, this is early alpha, and as I showed earlier, these talents are all over the fucking place. Cruelty was brought in as well. Furious Slash always deals damages if you're enraged. Again, sort of nullifying the idea that enrage is a very big deal. They're trying to, seemingly, in my opinion, and I'm sure you can see the evidence here, they're trying to push us away from enrage being a major thing. The problem is, it's like Furious Slash doesn't do a great deal of damage anyway. It's like 15k. It's not mega. But if you're taking Frenzy and you're going to be doing Furious Slash like every 4.5 seconds, then you get the idea. I think I should back onto that Bloodthirst's additional chance to crit was dropped by 15%. It's now only 25%. It's much more difficult to become Enraged now, which is why they have things like Outburst and why they have this, Reckless Abandon. Reckless Abandon changes your recklessness to a 30-second cooldown, and that means that you have 2 ways every 30 seconds of giving yourself Enraged, because there's a really, really ridiculously high chance that your Bloodthirst will crit while under the effects of recklessness, right? So you can now do this every 30 seconds, okay? Reduces the cooldown of recklessness by 50%, and it gives you 100 rage, which is not a big deal in a scenario where we're dropping rage all the time. So if this is like I think this is more of a talent of a bygone era. There was a build which was still cool. I was actually okay with it. Really okay with it. I have nothing against Enrage builds at all. I'm telling you how it's going, not my personal preference. I hope you could tell the difference. And the Heroic Strike was in the game. I believe it was here instead of Massacre. And you could do an Enrage build. You could either do the Rampage or Carnage build, which we'll get to in a second, or you could do the Enrage build. And it seems that Blizzard was like, we don't want you to care about Enrage that much. So this, it feels like it probably will go by the wayside, maybe, because at the moment, Carnage is too good, in my opinion. Dragon Roar was still around, which is cool. Dragon Roar does what it does. It feels like it should belong somewhere else in the tree, though. Maybe in place of Bladestorm, potentially. We'll see, we'll see. Dragon Roar, again, it's just one of those like Avatar or Bladestorm. It just feels slightly out of place. I get what it's doing, but there are other things to do. It's an instant cast AoE, but we're putting it side by side with Carnage, and then you tie this into Meat Grinder. There's a lot of change to be done here, guys. A lot of change, but I'm giving you the idea. So what is Carnage? Carnage reduces the cost of Rampage by 40, and Rampage consumes all of your remaining rage to further increase its damage proportional to rage spent. This means that your Carnage, especially if you line it up with something like a Recklessness, actually does outrageous damage. So I'll show you. So we get a full rage bar because of Carnage, and then we do things like Recklessness, Rampage. You get the idea. That's just Rampage, okay? Rampage just does crazy, 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 crazy damage. You can see 82k, 44k. I'm only level 102, by the way. Yeah. So Rampage, when it's got a full rage bar, is very cool. And it kind of looks to me, and this again, I'm pointing to you to what I think the idea of this spec is supposed to be, is that you will, the resource sort of management of Fury will be literally getting as close to just over 100 rage as possible, and then spending it on Rampage. That means you'll be making choices. There's a reason that Bloodthirst does, like, a lot. A lot of rage generation, yeah, like, see? Plenty of rage generation, like 25, I believe it is. Raging Blow does 10, and Furious Slash does 5. Call me crazy, but the reason Furious Slash does 5, while it seems silly at the first, is to allow you to make choices based on how close you are to 100 rage, yeah? So not just as a top-up, but if you're at 95 rage, like there, 95 rage, you could use like a Furious Slash just to get you straight to 100 and then spend it without wasting all the excess rage you would generate doing a Bloodthirst. Now, they have to be very careful with balancing this, but this is going for like most DPS specs right now. Shadow Priests are suffering from this. Balance Druids are suffering from this because they have similar resources, kind of, in the way it works, is balancing the correct amounts. Because it could easily get to the point where you're generating so much rage that it doesn't fucking matter. If you've not taken Frenzy, you might never press Furious Slash. It doesn't matter if you waste the rage for a Bloodthirst. It doesn't matter if you waste the rage for a Raging Blow. But what I would really like to see is that they do it proportionally so that those choices do matter. And therefore, you'll see a better player pulling off way more Rampages comparative to somebody who's just spamming whatever he has and then pressing Rampage whenever he sees a full rage bar. Yeah, it might be better to look to people who are doing like 95 rage Carnages. We'll have to see the math on the final numbers. Right now, the numbers don't mean a goddamn thing, and therefore it's pointless to look at it. But that's generally how it plays, okay? So right now, Fury is looking like the idea will be to get as much rage as possible, spend it on Rampage, and then rinse and repeat, while making choices along the way. What you will be doing is pay attention to Enrage, because Enrage certainly does affect some things, like Odin's Fury, yeah? And you'll also be paying attention to this, Berserking. Very cool. Look at this. Haste and crit chance increased by 60%. What? Yeah. Very cool. Will this survive? I don't know. I've played what am I saying? I've played every DPS spec so far available in Legion. There aren't many that have anything as good as Berserking. They really don't. It was nerfed in this iteration. It used to proc all the time. But yeah, it still procs reasonably regularly. So it comes from your artifact weapon. Raging Blow is a chance to activate Berserking, increasing your attack speed and crit by 5% every second for 12 seconds. Very meaty. And kind of offsetting. I believe they're probably working around this to try and offset the Enrage, maybe. So let's talk about Enrage. They reduce the Enrage window and reduce the chance to get Enraged. I can only look at this. There's not... The fact is, let me look at it this way. The Enrage window is now so small in this iteration that it's very difficult to make capitalizations on it outside of a couple of Raging Blows or an Odin's Fury. And beyond that, you're looking at Rampage anyway, right? Or you're going to be doing like Enraged Executes, obviously. So you'll be looking for that to happen. Those are very sort of niche moments. They're not something you're going to be consistently sort of trying to make use of every few seconds in a fight, especially because you have a 5-second window. You'll be using the Raging Blows to generate the 10 rage over the 5 that Furious Slash generates outside of Bloodthirst, right? Pretty obvious stuff. It just seems that they just don't want you to care about it. They like that it gives you all the bonus damage. It's giving you like 34% now, which goes naturally into Rampage consistently. A big problem with Fury Warriors, especially the biggest complaint, has been the inconsistency with having to crit in order to get your damage. And when you run into moments of not critting, it's really horrible. Blizzard's answer to that seems to be, let's make you care less about it. Yeah? The real benefit to being enraged right now is obviously the white damage and the Raging Blows generating extra rage to get into Rampage. But they've made a system that allows you to get there to a full rage bar pretty quickly, regardless of if you're enraged. I've done some logs, and what I've seen is that your white damage is extremely high, and Rampage is very high as well, and that's generally down to the fact that you have ludicrous haste from both Berserking and from talents, so you're white hitting all the time, generating rage and doing lots and lots of damage. And honestly, Enrage happens plenty, because you'll be using things like Wreck, you'll be doing all these, you're going to be throwing out a lot of Bloodthirst. It happens plenty, but if it doesn't, it's not a big deal, and I prefer that. I really do prefer that. Although the guys who like Enrage are a little bit angry about it, and I totally get that, but I just feel that's what they're doing. They're saying, look, getting Enraged is nice because it'll give you the extra rage. Raging Blow does decent damage, but it's more a way of more quickly getting to big rampages, or big carnages, I should say, right? That's what they're saying. That's the way it looks to me. Like it or not, that seems to be the way it's playing, okay? I don't want to get into the exact mechanics. There are some problems with the window being 5 seconds in terms of how many Raging Blows you can do in terms of pressing Rampage, but it's too early to go into the specific numbers. We'll be looking at that deeper into the beta. We will certainly be tackling those things. So just to reiterate this point, let's take a look at our artifact weapons. Our artifact weapons generally point a lot again towards Rampage. We have spells like Unstoppable, where Rampage damage is increased by 30%. That's buffed by one of my relics, by the way. These are relics you get that upgrade the item levels of your weapons. You can see there I have a Wailing Winds, gives me 20 item levels, and gives me Unrivaled Strength as its perk, which is this down here. Increased Recklessness also increases crit damage by 10%, which means those wreck carnages, that's why you're seeing those crazy numbers, right? Pretty amazing. I have Unstoppable, which comes from Pillaged Honor, which gives you an extra rank. So ordinarily, out of interest, I just want to show you this, is ordinarily Unstoppable has 3 out of 3. But if you relic and buff it, you actually get an extra rank to keep increasing that. And no doubt that's going to scale into the future. We're only looking at the super basic relics here. So the later zones like Surumar, or even the further scaled zones that we'll go into when they're unlocked, will actually give greater artifacts. I'm more than tempted to go and re-get this guy to 104 to get as much more artifact power as I can. So you can see there, Rampage damage increased by 30%. And then you can see when you're enraged, your auto attacks are guaranteed to hit, which works really nice with the amount of white damage that Fury Warriors are currently doing, which is a lot, and the amount of haste that they pick up. Again, pace, urgency, that's what the Fury Warrior is all about. You have some weak ones like the damage of Bloodthirst, don't really care too much about that. And then while below 50% health, Bloodthirst heals for 33% more. Yeah, that's going to be 3 ranks, so 99% more. Not good. Let's look at the important ones. Odin's Champion. When you use Rampage, Odin has a chance to declare you the champion of the Valajar for 10 seconds, causing you to generate 10 rage per second, and causes all special attacks to reduce the cooldown of all abilities by 3 seconds. So that means that we'll get more Odin's Furies, more Recklessnesses. I assume Recklessnesses, what a word. I assume, I haven't managed to get there because of the way artifact power costs are at the moment under the alpha. But yeah, you can see again, tied into Rampage majorly with the first perk you're going to pick up. Who doesn't want this? 10 rage per second leading into yet more Rampages. How this will play out, I don't know. It's likely to be some sort of RPPM because you will be able to do a lot of rampages if this thing is very consistent. Very crazy. Raging Blow, not going to complain. It's decent enough. Okay, decent enough. This enraged maximum health has increased. Whatever. These are all things that seem to tie into appeasing the guys who are really upset about the 30% damage, extra damage taken, which is just, as you guys will know of the channel, it's not a big deal at all. Love this. Execute crit strikes increased by crit strike chance increased by 9%. So obviously that plays really nicely into Massacre. You can see some synergies here. When Massacre leads into Rampage, you get the idea, guys. They want you to give a fuck about Rampage. If you don't like the look of Rampage, be prepared to not enjoy the Fury Warrior and Legion right now, in my opinion. Okay, in my opinion, just be ready for that. It's very likely to be the case that you won't enjoy it if you don't like the idea of getting a lot of rage, spending it on one ability, and you're not that interested in animations and stuff, right? If you're not that interested in seeing this all the fucking time, which I am, I really enjoy it. So you can see how Enrage gives me all these extra raging blows. Crit Rampage! And then continuing this sort of momentum. If you're not interested in this, or this looks really boring to you, it's a very simple style of play. Not gonna lie to you, this is not the most complex thing in the world, right? If you're not interested in it, then be prepared to not enjoy the Fury Warrior and Legion, is all I'm gonna say, because they are building heavily. They're very proud, obviously, of Rampage. They're very happy with the feedback it's got. Almost universally praised as being quite kind of cool, but really upset some people who preferred the, I want to say older style of Fury, but it's actually the newer style, like Kata going forward style of Fury. They're really pushing all that style of play seemingly over to ARMS. Now, unfortunately, ARMS is not available on the alpha right now, so I can't really confirm that, but the class preview that we've had certainly suggests that. Okay, guys? So, lots of interesting stuff there. Still my favorite spec so far in Legion. I love it. As an old school Fury player, this is right up my street. More than happy with it. I hope they make the resource system a little bit more complex. My only concerns with it, if I'm going to give any, without getting over the top and trying to give numbers and stuff, is that we'll just have so much rage that whatever button we press won't fucking matter. That's my only concern. And that would lead us to literally just caring probably about Frenzy. Which would be really, that might get a little bit tiresome, is to having to have this sort of cloud hanging over our heads all the time. This is the spell that actually worries me the most. As silly as it sounds, its current iteration compared to its first one really bugs me. Really bugs me. This 5.5 second window every 10 seconds while doing every encounter. Ugh. So boring. Just one of those tiresome things to maintain that didn't really need to exist, rather than just focusing on getting a shitload of rage and then kicking something in the fucking teeth, which is what Fury seems to be about. Thematically, class fantasy, it's working out. It fits the fantasy that I enjoy about Fury. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.